Okay, I'm back. Now we're on to President Biden and climate change. So, climate change is a very high priority for President Biden. If you go to the whitehouse.gov website and you go to priorities, climate is his second priority after control of COVID-19. Okay, so talks about he'll take swift action to tackle the climate crisis, whole of government effort, and the creation of good paying union jobs to build a modern and sustainable infrastructure, right? We're talking about planning. This is a big plan: modern and sustainable infrastructure, um, and put us on a path to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Not like he's going to be president in 2050, but that's the goal under his climate plan. Okay, so once he came into office on January 20th, 2021, and first day he issues an executive order reversing Donald Trump's environmental policies, pretty much all of them. Okay, he called for an internal review by the EPA of all of their regulations issued during Trump's presidency, not pregnancy. Um, Remember, we were talking about how there was oil and gas drilling in the Arctic. Put a moratorium on that. There was also a sanctuary in the North Bering Sea from oil and gas drilling, and he reinstated that. He created a whole interagency working group on social cost of greenhouse gases. Um, and he just revoked a bunch of Trump's executive orders. His EPA, since he's been there, they issued, talking about hydrofluorocarbons, which are sources of greenhouse gases. So this is there are chemicals that were used to replace things like Freon, those air conditioning and refrigeration kind of things, and aerosols. But they're actually, kind of maybe bad too. They are greenhouse gases. And the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act of 2020 that tells the EPA to phase down the production and consumption of these HFCs. Okay, so that's big. And then in 2021, EPA issued a rule to phase that down by 85%. And the goal would be avoid up to 0.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. So, that's something. We talked about that the EPA regulated car and light duty truck emissions. So there were in 2021, those were finalized. What did we say? They started 2012. So now that were supposed to take it into effect in 2014 or something. So now we have the emission standards for 2023 to 2026, which are the strongest ever standards for that sector. And that will avoid more than 3 billion tons of emissions through 2050. So that's pretty big. They're working the EPA. This isn't Biden. This is the EPA now, but under Biden's administration, working on greenhouse gas standards for aircraft. Right, those haven't been regulated before. Working on renewable fuel standards. Okay, kind of like a replacement that they're trying to swap out petroleum-based fuel in certain instances to renewable fuel. We talked about, how electric companies are one of our highest CO2 emitters. Well, the methane is the largest source of methane emissions are the oil and gas industry. So proposed rule in 2021 to reduce them. 2022 supplemental proposal on that, and they will be issuing a final rule on this oil and gas industry regulation in 2023. Okay, power plants, right? So we remember that we live from Connecticut versus the power companies. They're looking at it, how to reduce greenhouse gas from power plants, and how to use the Clean Air Act to do that. They opened a docket, so they're like in the information gathering stage for this, a docket to collect public input to help the agency. Okay, landfill. They finalized 2 rules in 2016 on new source standards, and we'll learn about what new source standards are as we go through. And there's a federal plan that was issued in May 21 that implements these 2016 guidelines on landfills. June 2022, greenhouse gas reporting rules were proposed. So that's all that's going on. So there, the big stuff that they've done that's final is this renewable standards program, and the light duty trucks, and then the hydrofluorocarbon rules. So those are the concrete things. The other stuff is all in process. Courts, it's kind of hard to judge, the president by what's going on with the courts, but I don't know if you remember the Clean Power Plan under Obama, and the how the states were opposed to it, and it was all up to the DC Circuit to decide. But then the DC Circuit kind of tabled that because the administration was changing. So when the Clean Power Plan was reinstated by Biden, it vacated the repeal of the Clean Power Plan and affirmed the EPA's obligation to set these carbon dioxide standards for the existing power plants. So that's why they're looking at it now, right? They're in that information gathering stage. And again, EPA plans to issue a proposal on that pretty soon, spring 2023. So we talked about paralegal roles with regard to, zoning and planning. On climate change, if you are in the private sector, a paralegal might be dealing with compliance. So, keeping track of the EPA regulations and their emission standards. And a lot of it is record keeping. So, as we talked, there's a lot of self monitoring by factories and industry. So if you are monitoring the amount of a certain emission of a certain type of pollutant, you have to keep records of that. So, making sure the records comply with all the regulations, having them available for inspection if the EPA would like inspection. So that kind of thing, record keeping and analysis and compliance would be if you're in the private sector. Obviously, if you are in the public sector on the EPA, on like the public side, you might be, assisting in litigation. You wouldn't be doing the real investigation, because that would be like the technical people. But if you ever got to the point where you were going to court, either as an environmental entity to enforce these regulations, you would be doing litigation support on that. So that's it for this one. The last thing that we haven't kind of discussed in the module is the quiz, but the quiz is the quiz. I did, based on some of your input, post a study guide for things to be strongly looking at before taking the quiz. And other than that, I will chat with you next week. If you need to talk to me, you can come to office hours on Wednesdays. If Wednesdays don't work for you and you want to chat with me, just reach out and send me an email and let me know your availability, and we can set up a convenient time. Have a great week.